The arena and the forgotten child. The sky above Arrow burned in colors that shifted like water reflecting fire. The Galactic Championship had begun. This was not an ordinary battle, but a grand event where the finest warriors of the galaxy came to prove their strength. Every 4 cycles, this arena became a place of pride, blood, and power. Thousands of alien species filled the massive stadium that floated in the upper atmosphere of the neutral planet. The crowd roared with excitement as the first teams entered the field. High above the fighting ground, in a platform made of glass and light, sat the honored guests. Among them was a small boy. His skin was pale green, thin like paper, and his left leg was replaced by a heavy mechanical limb that did not fit him well. His name was Lem. He belonged to a race known for their engineers, not their warriors. He had suffered from a birth defect that made him unable to walk without support. The exosuit they gave him was old, barely functioning, held together by patches and weak energy cells. He had been invited as a guest from his world, not to fight but to watch. He was supposed to represent hope and strength, but most saw him as a decoration. Lem sat near the edge, his wide eyes scanning the battlefield. The sound of weapons clashing echoed through the air. He smiled faintly, trying to enjoy the event, but his suit made a clicking noise. The leg joint froze. He tried to adjust it, but his fingers were weak. He leaned forward, lost balance, and fell onto the glass floor. His thin arms shook as he tried to lift himself. No one around him moved. Some guests looked his way and quickly turned their heads. A few chuckled quietly. Others simply ignored him. On the far side of the arena, a transport pod arrived. It opened. Slowly, a tall figure stepped out, wearing a worn-out coat, dark from years of war and dust. His hair was silver, short, and his face carried lines of age and battle. This was Mason, a human who once led armies in the darkest war the galaxy had known. He had not been seen in public for many years. He had refused medals and avoided politics. No one knew why he chose to attend the championship today. Mason looked around. The noise did not distract him. His eyes moved across the crowd until they stopped at the platform. He saw Lem lying on the ground. The boy's arms still shook. No one helped. Something inside Mason grew still. He remembered another boy, long ago, on a burning planet. A child left behind by his own kind. He had failed to reach that boy in time. His promise from that day whispered again in his mind. Never walk past the broken. He walked forward. His steps were calm but strong. He did not ask for permission. He did not wait for an announcement. The guards at the side of the path noticed him and gave confused looks. One tried to stop him, but Mason gave him a single glance and the guard froze. He continued walking. Up on the platform, Lem still struggled. His arm finally gave way, and he lay flat. His breathing grew fast. His exosuit sparked once. A tiny burn formed near his back. Panic reached his eyes, but still no one came. Then a shadow fell over him. Large boots stepped beside his head. A pair of hands, strong but gentle, lifted him slightly and placed him in a sitting position. Lem blinked. A human was kneeling beside him. The man placed a hand on the boy's chest to check his breathing, then slowly began adjusting the suit. Mason said nothing. He moved with care. The guests nearby stared in confusion. A few stood, whispering among themselves. Some called for security. Others pulled out their recording devices. The live cameras from the arena shifted toward the strange scene. The broadcast, meant to focus on the battle below, now showed a human veteran helping a forgotten alien child. The crowd began to quiet. From high officials to common watchers, all eyes slowly turned to the screen. The battle sounds faded in their minds. The image of the war hero kneeling before the weak child stirred something deep inside. Many hearts. Mason fixed the leg joint. First, his hands moved with skill. He used a small tool from his coat to adjust the energy flow. The sparks stopped. He then pulled out a soft cloth and wiped the boy's cheek where it had scraped the floor. Lem looked at him with wide eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a soft breath came. "You're safe," Mason said, with a quiet voice that only the boy could hear. The boy gave a weak nod. Someone finally spoke into the arena speaker system. A voice filled the air, asking the human to return to his seat. Mason did not respond. He stood up slowly, keeping one hand on Lem's shoulder to keep him steady. The camera zoomed in. The face of the boy. The face of the human. The silence between them spoke louder than any cheer from the crowd. On the nearby wall of the platform, a small alien girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and pointed at the screen. "Why did no one help him?" she asked. Her mother had no answer. Mason turned his head and looked out at the stadium. His eyes met the camera. He did not speak yet. He simply stood beside the boy, a silent question hanging in the air. Why did it take a human stranger to notice a child in pain? The championship continued in the background, but the real event had already begun. The past and the promise. The arena lights kept shifting, but their brightness now failed to steal attention. Something quiet had settled over the crowd. People no longer shouted or clapped. Even the warriors in the lower grounds had slowed their pace. The tension in the air had changed. Everyone now looked toward the platform where the human stood beside the weak alien child. Mason still kept one hand on Lem's shoulder. He could feel the shaking in the boy's body. The repairs were only enough to stop the pain. The suit was still too heavy for someone like Lem. The weight of it pressed down on his small frame. Mason knelt again and adjusted a few more wires near the back panel. The child looked at him with tired eyes that still held a quiet spark. Mason saw that spark and felt a memory rise like smoke from the corners of his mind. He remembered a world far away, one with red storms and shattered cities. He remembered the cries of wounded children under collapsed buildings. His team had moved too fast that day. They had to push forward. No one stopped for the small ones left behind. Mason had watched a boy cry out, trapped under broken metal, hands stretched out for help. The mission leaders told them to keep moving. He obeyed that day and hated himself for it ever since. After that war, Mason walked away from medals and titles. He never wanted glory. He wanted peace in a place that had forgotten the meaning of it. He made a silent promise that he would never ignore a cry for help again, no matter how small, no matter how quiet. Now he was here, in front of the galaxy's eyes, and the same choice had come again. This time he had moved without thinking. His legs had carried him before his mind even caught up. Lem's breathing was slower now, but uneven. The boy seemed afraid to speak, as if his voice would not be heard or respected. Mason reached into the side of his coat and pulled out a small cube-shaped tool. It had once been used to calm soldiers in combat stress. He pressed it gently against Lem's side. A soft pulse ran through the boy's body. His muscles relaxed. His hands stopped shaking. "Better," Mason said, not asking, just stating what he knew. The boy nodded slowly. Far behind them, the voice of an official repeated instructions. They wanted Mason to leave the platform and return to the guest section. They claimed rules were being broken. He had stepped where he should not. He had touched what was not his to fix. But Mason didn't move. His eyes remained on the boy. The crowd below began to murmur. Some voices supported the official. Others asked why a child had been left alone in the first place. The arena had always been strict about control and tradition. Interference was punished. But this moment felt different. Near the center platform, an announcer spoke carefully. He explained who Mason was. A veteran of the 11-year war. A human leader who once walked into fire without armor to pull injured enemies to safety. A man who had refused to command any more troops after peace was declared. The crowd listened closely. They had heard stories about him but never expected to see him here. The announcer said his name again, Mason. Just that. One word that now stood. At the center of a storm no one had expected, Lem tried to speak. His voice came out dry, weak, almost silent. "You didn't walk past," the boy said. Mason looked at him and gave a small nod. "No," he replied. "I saw you." The boy tried to smile but his lips only twitched. Still, it was enough. Mason gently lifted the boy into his arms. The hover sled. Nearby was not made for transport, but he adjusted a few settings on the side. The machine responded with a soft glow. He placed Lem onto it and activated the low-speed hover mode. The machine floated quietly, just enough to keep the child steady and comfortable. Security guards appeared near the edge of the platform. They didn't move forward. They stood still, unsure what to do. No one wanted to be the one to drag a human war hero away from a disabled child on live broadcast. Some guests still whispered, a few turned away. Others watched with a strange stillness on their faces. Then someone clapped. It was a quiet sound at first. A small alien child in the crowd, clapping with short, fast hands. Then another joined. Then another. Soon the sound spread. Not loud, not wild, but clear. A calm wave of slow claps filled the arena. It was not for victory or battle. It was for something else. Mason turned slightly and looked out into the stadium. He didn't speak to the cameras. He didn't make a grand statement. He only looked around and then placed his hand over Lem's hand. Far across the arena, on a distant wall screen, a message began spreading through digital feeds. A quote from Mason's past had appeared. It read, "The strongest warrior is not the one who wins every fight. It is the one who refuses to leave others behind." The tournament below resumed, but nothing felt the same. Even the warriors moved differently. Their strikes were less wild, more focused. Their eyes often lifted to the platform above. In a galaxy full of weapons and walls, something softer had broken through. Not power, not skill, but compassion. Lem leaned back against the soft curve of the hover sled. His eyes no longer filled with fear. The crowd that once ignored him now looked at him with something close to respect. Mason stood tall beside him, not as a soldier, not as a hero, but as a man who simply remembered a promise and chose not to forget it. Shock, resistance, and the crowd turns. The championship raged on in the lower arena where fighters from distant stars clashed for glory and pride, but most eyes were no longer on the battles. Instead, they followed every move of the human and the child standing above the chaos. On the upper platform, Mason remained still beside Lem, who now rested quietly on the soft gliding hover sled. The suit Lem wore had stopped sparking, though it still looked too large for his small body. Officials began to speak in low voices, behind closed doors. They argued about rules and tradition. Some wanted to remove Mason from the platform quietly, others feared what might happen if they did it by force. Cameras still broadcast everything. News channels from across the galaxy were now tuned in. The image of Mason kneeling beside Lem had already begun to spread beyond the arena. Across planets and stations, people watched and waited. A voice crackled through the main speakers. It was the voice of the Grand Coordinator. He spoke with a tone cold and precise. He said the tournament had strict rules. He said no guest should step onto the field or platform without clearance. He said human Mason had violated sacred protocols. He asked the guards to escort him back to the guest area immediately. Mason heard the voice but did not move. Lem opened his eyes slowly. The boy looked scared again, not of pain, but of what might happen next. Mason placed his hand gently on the hover sled, keeping Lem calm. The guards moved forward, but their steps were slow. These were not just any guards. They knew who Mason was. They had grown up hearing stories of his actions during the war. Stories where he saved both allies and enemies. Stories where he stood in front of wounded children and refused to retreat. Now they were being asked to pull him away from a disabled child while the galaxy watched. The lead guard reached the edge of the platform. He hesitated. His hand hovered near his weapon, not to draw it, but as a habit. Mason turned to face him. No anger in his eyes, no fear, just a steady calm that made the guard lower his hand. "Do what you must," Mason said in a clear voice that carried across the quiet arena. "But I will not leave this boy alone." The lead guard looked at his team, then at the crowd, then at the camera drones floating above. He stepped back without a word. A wave of murmurs rose from the crowd. Some cheered softly, others clapped again. A few still shook their heads, but their voices were drowned by the growing approval. Meanwhile, Lem looked up at Mason. His eyes filled with something deeper than fear or thanks. It was something like belief. No one had ever defended him like this. No one had stood between him and the world before. The hover sled beeped once, its battery now low. Mason knelt again and connected a small power cell from his coat to the sled's input port. The lights on the machine turned bright blue. Lem smiled weakly. On the far side of the stadium, a group of high-ranked officials spoke through private lines. They wanted to silence the moment, control the narrative, shift the attention back to the games. One of them gave the order to cut the live feed from the platform. But it was too late. Independent channels had already picked up the footage. Social streams were flooded with clips and images. People added captions in many languages. Messages filled with words like courage, dignity, compassion, and strength. A few even called Mason the protector of the forgotten. A reporter from a nearby moon station managed to connect to a private drone near the platform. The drone zoomed in and caught Mason's hand resting gently on Lem's. The image spread like fire across the networks. In a school, on a mining colony, a teacher paused the lesson to show her students the moment. In a care center on a damaged freighter, old veterans watched in silence, some wiping tears. On a farming world where humans and aliens lived side by side, children painted pictures of the human and the child and placed them on walls. Back in the arena, the announcer returned, his voice different, now slower and softer. He spoke not of the fighters but of the platform where something greater than a battle had taken place. He asked the crowd to consider the meaning of strength. Was it in lifting weapons or lifting others? Was it in standing tall or in kneeling beside the fallen? More people in the stands stood. Some saluted Mason. Others placed hands on their hearts or raised fingers in signs of peace. The fighters in the arena below began to slow down. One pair stopped completely. They looked up at the screen and lowered their weapons. A judge tried to restart the match, but neither warrior moved. They walked to each other and shook hands. The crowd erupted in cheers. The championship was still happening, but the spirit of it had changed. Mason finally looked up toward the nearest camera. He said nothing. He only nodded once. That nod became a message shared again and again. A message that said kindness did not need loud words or bright lights. It only needed action. The platform lights dimmed slightly. Lem closed his eyes, but his face showed peace. Mason remained by his side, not as a hero, not as a symbol, just as a man who had kept a promise. The moment that had begun with silence now echoed across worlds. A veteran had stepped forward when no one else had. A child once ignored had been seen. And the galaxy, for the first time in a long time, had paused to feel something other than fear or pride. It had paused to feel humanity. Humanity's message. The stadium lights dimmed and shifted to a calmer tone. The roar of the championship had now become something quieter, something deeper. The battle still continued in the lower arena, but the real war was no longer between fighters. It was between values, between what the galaxy had become and what it could still choose to be. Mason stood on the platform, his figure tall but without arrogance. He had no medals on his coat, no symbols of rank, yet his presence felt heavier than steel. Beside him, the hover sled hummed gently, carrying Lem's fragile form without effort. The boy was resting, but his eyes still opened now and then to glance at the crowd below. More eyes met his every time he looked. No one saw him as weak anymore. They saw something else, something honest, something unbreakable. Mason looked toward the hovering camera that had followed him since the moment he stepped onto the platform. He did not need to raise his voice. His words came slow, steady, and clear. Each word dropped into the silence like stone into still water. "I did not come here to fight," he said. "I came to watch like many of you. I saw the lights, I heard the songs, I saw warriors trained for glory, but I also saw a child left behind." He paused for a moment, letting the words settle. He did not cry for help, he did not beg, he simply fell. No one helped. Not because they were cruel, but because they were busy. Busy with pride, with rules, with the belief that someone else would act. But no one did. He turned his eyes toward Lem, then back to the crowd. Strength is not what we do when the world watches. Strength is what we do when no one expects us to act. This boy does not have muscle or weapons. He has courage. He came here knowing how others see him. He came in a broken suit with a broken body. Still he came. Still he watched with hope. Murmurs spread across the crowd. They were not whispers of doubt. They were soft agreements, quiet reflections. Mason continued without lifting his tone. During the war, one walked past many like him. Some reached for help. I looked away. I followed orders. I told myself it was not my place. I carry those faces in my memory. Every night, every step. I made a promise that if I ever saw another one fall, I would not walk past again. A breeze moved through the upper platform, soft and cold. Lem's eyes filled with tears that did not fall. He reached out and grabbed Mason's hand. The gesture was small, but it sent a shock through the audience. It reminded them of something real, something ancient, something called empathy. The Grand Coordinator watched from his high chamber. His advisors spoke quickly, offering him ideas on how to respond. Some said to silence the human, some said to punish the interruption. But others warned that this moment had already grown too large. Across thousands of systems, people were no longer watching for the fight. They were watching for the man and the child. In the crowd, a group of young alien cadets stood and held up small signs. They had drawn pictures of Lem holding a glowing star. Below the drawing, they had written words in several languages. The message was clear. "We see you." Mason saw the signs. He said nothing. He only nodded. The platform sensors picked up a signal. A message was being broadcast from outside the stadium. It came from the home planet council of Lem's species. A representative appeared on the main screen. Her voice was calm but shaken. "We brought this child as a symbol of progress," she said. "But we failed him. We dressed him in broken metal and called it pride. We placed him high so he would be seen, but gave him nothing to stand on. It was not the war hero who shamed us. It was our own silence." Many in the crowd lowered their heads. Some cried. Some looked at the platform with newfound respect. Some simply stood still. A second message came. This time from the United Star Council. A member from a race once in conflict with humans spoke with slow emotion. In this galaxy, we built arenas to test our strength. Perhaps now we should build halls to test our hearts. Let this moment be the beginning. More voices joined. One after another, representatives, soldiers, civilians. Across the galaxy, messages poured into the arena broadcast lines. Words of thanks. Words of apology. Words of change. Mason said nothing else. His part was done. His actions spoke louder than speeches ever could. Lem looked at him again. The boy's voice came quiet, but sure. They see me now. Mason squeezed the child's hand gently. They always could, he replied. They just forgot how to look. The final matches of the tournament were delayed, not canceled. Just delayed. No one complained. The audience remained seated, watching the stars above and the man who reminded them what it meant to be human. The platform lights dimmed once more. Not from power loss, but from respect. The galaxy had not changed in a single hour. Wars still existed. Pain still echoed in dark corners. But in this one moment, something small and bright had returned. Hope. The legacy that echoed the arena remained silent long after the platform lights dimmed. No one left their seats. The wind above the floating stadium moved slowly across the open. Dome as stars blinked in the black sky. A stillness had taken over, something peaceful, something unfamiliar in a place built for noise. Lem lay quietly on the hover sled. His breathing had steadied, his chest moved up and down in a calm rhythm. His fingers no longer trembled. His mind no longer spun in fear. Around him the air felt lighter, not because of technology but because of how the crowd had changed. They no longer looked at him as broken or weak. They looked at him as if he mattered. Mason stood beside him, still not seeking attention, still not trying to lead. He had done what he came to do, no more, no less. His eyes scanned the arena one last time, and then he looked down at the boy. Lem turned his head and gave a small smile. The corners of his mouth barely lifted, but the strength behind that smile reached deep into the heart of everyone watching. The Grand Coordinator appeared again on the main screen. His voice had lost its usual cold edge. It now carried a softer weight, like someone who had seen something too important to ignore. He announced a pause in the tournament. He said the moment deserved reflection, not distraction. He said the arena was a place of honor, and it would remain so by respecting what had just occurred. For the first time in the history of the championship, the games were not the center of attention. Mason gently tapped the hover sled controls. The machine floated forward, slow and smooth. Lem remained steady, his hands gripping the side as the crowd watched in silence. The path toward the exit was wide and clear. No one blocked the way. No one dared. The crowd parted like water on stone. Some reached out not to stop Mason, but to touch his coat or nod in respect. Others simply stepped back, placing hands on their hearts or lowering their heads. At the edge of the stadium, a group of students waited. They were from many species, different colors, shapes, and sizes, but all wore the same expression: admiration, understanding, hope. One of them stepped forward holding a small device. It was a memory beacon, a tool used to preserve moments for public records. She handed it to Mason with both hands. He took it gently and placed it in the chest pocket of his coat. "This is not just for us," she said. "It's for all who come after." Mason nodded once, then looked at Lem. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Lem gave a slow nod. They left the arena without a sound. No music played, no fanfare followed. Only silence and light. As they disappeared into the corridor, a ripple spread through the Galaxy. In the days that followed, news stations replayed the moment over and over. Artists painted scenes of the boy and the man. Writers filled columns with essays about strength and kindness. Songs were written in quiet languages spoken only on distant moons. All of them told the same story, a story about a child who could not stand and a man who knelt beside him. Across many planets, leaders began reviewing access laws for the disabled. New councils were formed to support those once ignored. Schools held discussions about empathy. Soldiers received training not just in combat, but in compassion. On Lem's home planet, his people welcomed him with a grand gathering, not a parade. Not a show, but a real welcome. His suit was replaced with a custom exosuit built by engineers who had watched the broadcast. It fit perfectly. It moved with him like a second skin. He no longer dragged his feet. He walked at his own pace. He was later invited to join an academy, not as a symbol, but as a student. He studied adaptive design and communication systems. He said he wanted to help others who felt unseen. Mason did not return to public life. He disappeared as quietly as he had appeared. Some said he returned to the outer colonies. Some believed he wandered between systems, helping where needed. He gave no interviews, he answered no calls. But his name remained on every tongue. Not as a myth, not as a legend, but as a reminder. Years later, the stadium where the incident happened was rebuilt. Not because it was damaged, but because its purpose had shifted. A new section was added just above the central platform. There stood a statue, not of warriors, not of champions, but of a tall man kneeling beside a small child. The statue had no title. It had no names. At the base were only words carved in a simple line. Strength is how we protect the ones no one sees. Every year, visitors placed flowers, small notes, and sometimes old broken tools around the base. Children would walk up and touch the hand of the child in the statue as if greeting an old friend. Lem grew older. He became a teacher. He never let fame change him. In his classroom, he kept a small worn coat folded on a shelf. No one asked where it came from, but everyone knew. He would often begin class with a question. What do you do when you see someone who cannot stand? The answers varied. Some students said help them up. Others said sit with them. A few said wait with them until help comes. Lem would smile and say, all good answers. But the real answer is simple. You see them. That's where it begins. The galaxy did not become perfect. Wars still happened. People still forgot each other. But the story of Mason and Lem lived on in songs and lessons in hearts. A quiet moment had changed something loud in the universe. A human war hero had reminded them not of victory, but of value. Not of conquest, but of connection. And in that one quiet act of kindness, something eternal was born. The end.